Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to a wonderful event tonight by the International Literacy Association. My name is Liisa Potts. I am the Language Arts Director at edreports.org. For those of you who don't know, EdReports is an independent nonprofit designed to improve K-12 education by increasing capacity of teachers, administrators, and leaders to seek and identify and demand the highest quality instructional materials. Tonight's webinar is part of ILA's discussion around the science of reading and some of the special work that's been done that you'll be able to read in Reading Research Quarterly dedicated to this topic. So you can learn more about this project by visiting literacyworldwide.org/SOR. At the end of tonight's presentation, you'll have an opportunity to see more detail and be able to get into that. So don't worry, we'll provide you with everything you need. Tonight, our guests, Amanda and Bob, will be joining us in a minute. But first, I want to let you know that you can submit questions. I'm sure there will be a lot of them. You just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to answer as many as time allows. For those of you asking, I've seen a couple notes in the chat around, are we going to record it? The event is also being streamed live on Facebook with the recording available immediately afterwards. And archives will be on Zoom on demand in a day or two, and then you'll find them later on YouTube. So with me tonight are Dr. Amanda P. Goodwin and Dr. Bob T. Jiménez, who's Professor Emeritus, both at Vanderbilt. They're co-editors of Reading Research Quarterly, and they're the driving forces behind not one, but two special issues of the journal that are going to be devoted to examining the science of reading instruction. So welcome, Bob and Amanda.
Thank you.
Is Amanda with us? Hello.
Oh, we can hear, yeah. Great,
you can hear, everyone can hear, we're good, fabulous. Great, so we'll just dive right in to this very exciting topic. Anybody who is in education who follows any chatter on social media or any research knows that this is a huge topic right now. So can you tell us why we're here? Let's start at the beginning. What is this project you embarked on and how did it begin? What's its origin story?
Well, I'll grab that one. You know, as a parent, as a teacher educator, as a researcher, just someone who loves education, I kept hearing the term science of reading everywhere. You know, I publish in the Scientific Science of Reading. I am the editor of Reading Research Quarterly, so I've seen a lot of science of reading. But what was amazing to me was how many different ways the science of reading was being discussed, and in particular, how it was being discussed in different arenas. And so Bob and I kind of got together and I said, Bob, you know, we need something that really kind of unifies the field and gets a sense of what as a field do we really think the science of reading is, and how does that apply to practice? And so, you know, we really tasked all the wonderful researchers who both are authors for RQ, review for RQ, read RQ. We tasked them with coming up with articles that could add to the science of reading. And I think that what's important there is that we were really focused on adding accurate information, bridging the different perspectives that are out there, and moving the field forward. And so that's what we asked authors to think about when they wrote. And that is also what we asked reviewers and our amazing cadre of associate editors to consider as we adjudicated these articles. You know, one thing that really came up was the talk about science of reading was loud, and it needed to be, the information needed to be considered quickly. And so we had to figure out a way to put this article out in 6 months. And that is really, really, really quick for publishing. And so, you know, we were really grateful for ILA and their team who jumped on board and tackled this challenge because, you know, when we put out a call, we expected 20 manuscripts, proposals, and we ended up with 80. And so it really just showed how much people want to contribute, how many different ways the science of reading could be thought about, and just the interest in the topic.
Yeah, I would just throw in there that I come to this topic from a very different kind of background than Amanda does. And we've thought about lots of different ways to bring more visibility and notoriety to the journal, Reading Research Quarterly. And one of the wonderful things that Amanda has been able to do with the journal under our editorship is provide people with very, very rapid feedback when they submit their work to RRQ. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but it definitely seems as though we have always got a large pile of manuscripts waiting for our attention. But because I come to this topic from a different kind of perspective, from a qualitative perspective, from the background of someone who has just started to think about doing research, classroom-based experimentally oriented research, I think I'm able to see some of the issues from a perspective that is a little bit less emotionally invested than some other folks, because this is somewhat new to me. And yet I love the fact that we've gotten this much or we've been able to sort of drive this much interest in the topic, because we've gotten so many submissions to the journal. And Amanda has, she mentioned the fact that this has all been put together in the last 6 months, which is unbelievable and unheard of in our field. I don't know that anything like this has ever been done before, to bring together this kind of a collection of scholars on a very controversial topic, and to put together a special issue like this one. To me, I think this is the first time in my career that I've seen anything like this. So I just want to throw that in there by way of a little bit of background in terms of what we've been doing this last year. And that's in addition to all of our regular editorial duties, which typically consists of 4 or 5 manuscripts that we're adjudicating every single week throughout the last 3 years of our editorship. So it's very impressive what is going on right now with Reading Research Quarterly.
It sounds like it. And so now I'm going to ask you a hot button question around, Amanda, you said 80, Bob, you backed this up. You said you had more. Can you talk a little bit about how you made the selection? Like, how did you decide what to put in there, knowing that you couldn't put every single thing in there? And having reviewed the executive summary, like, I was struck by how, like, the spectrum of scholarly research that's in there. Like, how did you make those decisions? Kind of what was your guiding North Star around making those decisions?
You know, I mean, Lisa, I think our North Star was our really our importance on bridging perspectives and presenting a broader image of science of reading than what is typically talked about. And so what was really interesting and important to us, just like Bob said, Bob and I come from different perspectives. And I think that was the strength of this issue. And the whole point was that we wanted different perspectives represented within this issue. And so whenever we chose reviewers for any article, we purposely tried to choose reviewers that were on different sides. And the point of that is that, you know, you can talk to one side all you want and convince the people that agree with you. But as we were talking to authors and reviewers, we realized that people weren't really on sides as much as they thought. Both sides were conveying really important understandings that the other side was interested in when they listened. And so having Bob and I thinking about this from a broad perspective and navigating sort of the bridge between our different backgrounds, and then having reviewers really come at these articles from different perspectives and communicate with authors from different perspectives, how to talk to different audiences and how to engage in this discourse in a way that unifies rather than divides. I mean, at the core of this, we all want kids to learn to read amazingly. You know, we all want to support teachers. I was a teacher for many years, still am a teacher. I consider myself a teacher. I'm trained teachers. You know, I think what's been so challenging to me about the science of reading is that there's kind of a blame game that goes on. You know, these people are doing it wrong. And my goal in doing this issue and my goal in identifying which papers we would include in the issue was to honor all that people were doing right and to honor the broad range of things that go into teaching this multifaceted thing we call reading. And so, to be honest, what the process was Bob and I printed out all those proposals and we had them all over our offices. This was before COVID. This was in February. And we were both actually in our offices, and like our hallway was covered in paper. And, we were just trying to sort the papers into buckets, buckets of the typical stuff you'd hear from science of reading, phonics, word reading stuff, which was important. We wanted that in there because that is an absolutely important part of the science of reading. And there is no question about that. But we also put things in other buckets like language comprehension or background knowledge or teacher preparation or adaptive expertise of teachers, or importantly, different types of readers, readers from different multilingual backgrounds, students with disabilities, students who were not responding to typical instruction. We really tried to put them into buckets, and our buckets kept changing as we walked through the hallway. But eventually we had enough buckets, and then we just kind of kept working from there to craft a strong set of articles. And truth be told, it was amazing. I mean, when we looked at what came in, it was the top scholars. We are so proud of our colleagues who all rose to the occasion. We asked for what was almost an impossible thing. We asked them to do a proposal, but then to submit an article within a month and a half after their proposal. And people did an amazing job. We asked reviewers to review within 2 weeks. That was absolutely amazing. We asked our associate editors. I can't say enough thank yous to all the people involved. Our associate editors helped us to really wrangle the reviews and to think about how do we take these different perspectives and give this feedback to authors in ways that is going to allow everybody to hear each other and to push the field forward. So big things, buckets were important to us, and the range, just like you said, we were purposeful on covering the range of information that was pertinent to the science of reading. And that was important to us because we kept hearing really narrow visions of it from different sources. But then when we talked to researchers, they unanimously saw it as a much broader construct. And so we wanted that to come out because we think that has really important implications for instruction. And as a classroom teacher, I would teach really differently if I was only thinking about the science of reading related to phonics and word reading versus thinking about the many other pieces that that were part of this issue.
It's an amazing collection of articles. Hopefully everyone who's listening right now will get a chance to take a very careful look at all the work that's been put together. But one of the things that really, really impresses me is the fact that once folks start putting their ideas down in writing and the peer review process sort of has its day in terms of providing feedback to the authors, the information and the ideas that people put down on paper are much less strident, a whole lot less sort of, a whole lot less, insulting than a lot of the kinds of information that you hear out in the public sphere. I was very, very amazed, or very, very surprised by the fact that people tended, as Amanda noted already, to be much more in agreement than they were in disagreement. I think there's still a few issues that come out in the papers where people express very strong opinions, but they do it very thoughtfully. They do it with evidence. They do it theoretically in terms of their, larger conceptual understandings of what literacy consists of. And I think even the times when folks are very much in disagreement, my sense is that this will move the field forward because everyone will know what exactly are the things that major figures in the field are thinking about these questions and these issues, and how do we make sure that we don't ignore them and talk past one another. And that's what I think is most interesting about this particular collection of research pieces as well as reviews of the literature. And I think there's quite a few that sort of fit that category.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll add to that and just say that I hope from each and every piece there's something to be learned. You know, I've been in this field as a teacher. I taught for 6 years. I've been in the researcher for over 10 years, and I've been an editor for 3 years, which means just for the editing part, you got to read a lot of journal articles.
Yeah.
You have to do a lot of learning of the science. And I can honestly say I learned something from every single article that was out there. And, you know, I'm a really practical person. Everything that I learn, I go try out on my little guinea pigs, my kids. And so it has totally changed how I see reading and reading instruction. And I hope it's that way for others. And kind of like Bob said, the point was not to get everybody in full agreement. The point was to be able to talk, to be able to have discourse about all these various important things and to move the field forward because we're talking about these things.
So before we get into findings, I was caught by and interested in something that both of you kind of mentioned about the children about whom you're talking. Like often in materials and in instruction and pedagogy, we're talking about like core kids. But I hear from both of you, and I see in the work that you're also talking about each child that's beyond just the magical core kid who's at grade level. Can you share a little bit about your thinking around that? Because it seems like a lot of research really, as you mentioned before, Amanda, gets really narrow about some child without considering all of each, like all children, each child.
Sure. Well, I can tackle that one. I think it's so having been a teacher, whenever you're a teacher, you realize the magic of each and every child. And you realize that no matter how much you know about the science of reading, sometimes things work better for some kids and less better for other kids, or you just have to change it, you know, based on their interests, their backgrounds. You've got to connect with them. And so I think what was really important for this issue was that we called out research about different types of readers. The field needs that. The field's been talking about readers as a broad category, and we have lots of really strong work on readers with dyslexia and you know, readers from different racial and ethnic and language backgrounds, but that is not always included in the science of reading. And so we purposely call that out to say that this research matters, and this is what we are finding from that. And personally, you know, so when we started this project, Liisa, this was before COVID. I mean, I don't know if you guys can remember back to February. It was a different world. I still had daycare. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it was a completely different experience. And since we did this call, I actually think the science of reading has become even more important as we've gone to virtual instruction. And some kids have thrived and some kids have really struggled on these different platforms. We know that when we finally get back into the classroom and when we can finally take off our masks and put down those shields, we are going to need the best science. And we're going to need the best science for each and every kid to catch them up. And so that was what mattered to me. It mattered to me that we knew the best science for each and every kid. And then the other side of this is, since we've done this work, you know, we've been in this era of really focusing on a call to action to both acknowledge and to address all the structural inequities that surround us in terms of race and multilingual students and immigration and all those various things. And so, you know, we wanted to emphasize that the science of reading includes all those kids as well. And importantly, all those researchers who are often not brought to the table. and in a way that they should be.
Yeah, I would just like to add a little bit.
Please.
Amanda and I both do classroom-based research, and we both work with teachers and we work with students. And the information that's included in a lot of these manuscripts has influenced our thinking and changed our thinking on some different issues. And so when we go into classrooms and we start talking to teachers and we start talking, or we observing what children are doing and how they're responding to instruction, we're thinking about the things that this body of research has to say to us as researchers and as mentors and instructors of teachers ourselves. What is it that we need to really focus on? How does background knowledge influence the reading comprehension of children who are learning English as a second language? That's the population that I've always been very, very much interested in. What do we know about accurate and quick and automatic word recognition skills? What do we need to do for that? What kinds of activities should we include in our instructional interventions? I think a lot of researchers want to know that information, but I think teachers as well want to know, how do I need to think about this? What sorts of things should I be looking for? And one of the things that I think is most impressive about this collection of research articles is that I think there's a lot of answers in there. And I think it's challenging information for some of us. Like I said, I've changed my mind on some of these topics and some of these issues. And my guess is anyone who's honest with themselves and is really thinking about these issues will start to consider, what is it that people are saying about all these different, I don't think they're they're not contradictory to one another. I think they complement all the things that we know about literacy instruction. And it's a whole lot more than what we knew when I was entering graduate school in the early 1980s. Things are changing as we speak. There's new information coming out. So we always have to be prepared to sort of modify and adjust our thinking. But I think there's a whole lot that we now know that we need to include in the instruction that's provided to kids. And as Amanda said, a lot of the students out there in the schools are not getting the kind of instruction that we know is critical in terms of their literacy, learning, and development. And as soon as this horrible pandemic is completed and over with, there's going to be a great deal of work that all of us are going to need to get sort of involved in very, very, very quickly. So,
and there I'll just add too, like Bob and I are big fans of teachers. So it's not that students aren't getting this information purposefully. It's that the science of reading is often being talked about in a more narrow way than what we found in this article, in this special issue. And so what's so important is that teachers want this information. District personnel want this information. And we are so excited to share this because we think that understanding the broad, multifaceted nature of reading is going to be critical to really serving all of these students. So we're excited. We think that there's, just like Bob said, there's a lot to learn in it. But to be honest, it's what we keep being asked by teachers and district personnel. And so we're just so excited that we have research-based evidence for folks to move on from many of the best names in our field.
So we're going to talk about messaging and kind of pushing out a little bit later, but first I want to go back to something that you both have mentioned, that you've both mentioned that you had disparate views around some of these things. And then that when you started examining the research that was presented and the articles that were coming in, that something was surprising to you, that you learned something. Can you share a little bit about, like, what were the findings that you found to be educative to you or surprising? And then was there anything that was not surprising to you?
Sure. I think for me, the most surprising thing was how broad people were thinking about it. So when I thought of the science of reading, for example, I didn't think about writing, but I think I missed this giant important component of reading. And so Steve Graham has this amazing piece that says, you know, for the science of reading to really achieve its full potential, we need to think about the science of writing as well. And he looks at multiple meta-analyses that show that interventions that include both reading and writing have better outcomes ultimately. You know, I found Claude Goldenberg's piece fascinating as well. He spoke to the fact that the science of reading often excludes English language learners. And, you know, in the pieces that he reviewed, he confirmed that yes, good instruction is good instruction for English language learners and others. But of course, it needs to be adapted for the oral language proficiency of English language learners. But what I found fascinating there was his discussion of the research showed that a lot of what was being done for English language learners improved things for monolingual learners as much or more. And so to some degree, good instruction that involved language mattered. And so it was these ideas that I knew that good instruction mattered, but I hadn't realized that instruction for English language learners, for example, would also be benefiting monolingual students. And so it was all these connections that were fascinating to me, and just the way that people spoke about things that come up in the science of research literature, like the 3Qing system. You know, that is always mentioned. And what happened was that I came into it with this perspective of, oh my gosh, like I'm scared to read about this. What is this? And I came away understanding much more deeply how the 3Qing system can really be used effectively and what kinds of things it can tell us about what kids are doing when they're reading, especially for multilingual students, for example, can tell me how they're translanguaging or those different things. And so I was really excited about that. I was really excited about Rich Milner's reminder to think about who's doing this research and how are we working with these communities. You know, so I think that there was, again, I learned something from every single article, you know, from Linnea Aries' piece. I was amazed that of the role of orthography. I knew it was there, but I never really thought about it related to vocabulary as well. And so in my household now, when I'm teaching my 4-year-old the word milk, I'm like pointing to the milk thing, you know, pointing to letters. And it's changed the way that those were some of the surprising findings that have changed the way that I think about those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many gems within this collection. I mean, information about what kinds of background knowledge really promote kids' comprehension. How much time should we be spending on syllabification instruction? As Amanda just mentioned, when we're teaching kids the alphabet and phonics, and what kinds of experiences and activities should we be engaging them in so that they associate spellings with patterns, with words, and with vocabulary learning, so that all of those things are coming together, not sort of in isolation and not as a means unto themselves, but as a foundation for promoting their reading comprehension and their engagement with text, which I think is something that everyone in the field agrees on. This is the goal. This is what we want kids to have. We want them to get into books, and we want them to have those wonderful experiences where they get to know new characters, and they're able to sort of enter into worlds that they never even thought were possible before. But they can't do that without a lot of these other kinds of foundational understandings, experiences, and information. And I think this collection of articles will really help folks think about those topics in ways that are much more thoughtful, rather than as I learned while reading these articles. I mean, the idea that it's all just either you're doing phonics instruction or you're not. And for some folks, that's what science of reading is. If those folks read this collection of articles, they're probably going to come away very disappointed because they won't get easy answers. One of the big takeaways from this collection of research articles is that there are certain things we know are absolutely essential and necessary for individuals, for children to become literate. but we don't know very much about exactly how to teach those things. We know a lot, but there's still a whole lot more to learn. How do we make sure that kids have those experiences, get the kinds of instruction that move them forward in terms of those kinds of understandings? And I really did like the fact that Amanda made a special effort to reach out to our colleagues of color, our colleagues from diverse backgrounds, and to get their perspective on in terms of what their thinking is about these issues, because I think it's very thoughtful, the information that we received. It's thought-provoking. I love the fact, for example, that Rich Milner pointed out, we need to, instead of thinking about children from diverse backgrounds and with respect to their differences, what is it that they're doing that we can use as a foundation to promote their literacy, learning, and development? That's not a brand new idea, but I think it sort of helps us move a little bit beyond where is it that I'm coming from as a researcher, and what are the questions that I ask, and the sort of the experiences that I take for granted. How do I need to sort of question those in terms of when I'm designing a research study, for example? What kinds of questions, what additional questions do I need to ask so that I'm not sort of automatically disenfranchising or alienating large groups of students? I think that information is in this collection. It's not a primary focus, but I think it's useful for thinking about what are the kinds of things we still need to do in the field so that the research that we conduct and that we publish actually brings about the kinds of changes that we would like to see.
And there, Bob, I also think that one of the beautiful parts of this collection is the emphasis on teachers. And the fact that we, just like you said, we don't know as much about how to teach these things, but we do know a lot about how we've been training teachers.
Yeah.
And we know a lot about the range of skills that we need teachers to have, from teaching reading to being critical consumers of information, to critically thinking about their students and their backgrounds. And so what was really a joyful piece for me was reading the articles about teacher education and reading that we know more than we need, but we still need to know a lot more. And so that was exciting. And the other piece I think that was really exciting too was there's a big emphasis in this article on translation of findings and context, infrastructure, for example. I think the science of reading hasn't done a great job of saying in what contexts is this going to work. I mean, COVID is a great example, right? So science of reading might work well, but then we go virtual and something's different, right? So context matters. And I'm really excited about the articles that called that out, thought about ways to support teachers, thought about ways to support districts, and also challenged researchers to do more translating of their findings and to work in partnerships with schools, teachers, classrooms, districts, because, like Bob said, we're in the classrooms and many of our greatest ideas and studies come from that work. But it's important to really kind of think about your positionality and, how this collaboration is going about and how it's a cooperative effort. So I think it's really an exciting, expansive collection.
There's a couple of articles in the collection from our colleagues at different universities in Texas who really push us hard to think about how are we including teachers in our thinking and our research designs, and as active collaborators when we're conducting research. Are we actually inviting them to tell us what their concerns are? And I think those are really important ways to think about research design, the kinds of data that we collect, and the ways that we include their input in terms of what we do with the research once we finish the work that we're doing. How do we then go about presenting it to the folks that actually made it possible in so many different ways? because at the end of the day, if teachers don't like what we're doing, our work isn't going to have much impact. And I think so that's always a very, very critical component. I agree with Amanda. The concerns of teachers, the concerns of folks in the schools are made very, very clear in this collection of work.
And I think the other thing that's made really clear is just a criticality. You know, I mean, we have things from academic language instruction where they're pushing back on the idea that it's just teaching of the skills, but instead framing it in a sociocultural context to say, you know, it's part of who these kids are. You know, they're really activating their language resources and helping them really kind of code switch in these different cultural contexts. And so I just think that there were, I would say, a solid third of the articles were really pushing us to be more critical consumers. I think that that's important. That moved me forward personally.
It's one of the emphases right now at RRQ, and I know I've appreciated so much, Amanda, when you push authors, tell us why this work matters. What difference does it make? So you have a statistically significant finding, that's great, but how important is that in terms of the outcomes that kids can expect or teachers can expect to see when they're working with children? I think that's one of the emphases that that definitely Amanda has pushed very hard for in terms of our editorship at Reading Research Quarterly.
And we really pushed the authors to say, like, how does their article add to this debate? And so in each article, authors come out and say, this is how I want to move the field forward. And I think that that's important because it's too easy to just write where we are. And this was too much of an effort to not move the field forward.
And so in talking, I want to home in a little bit on some of the pieces that you brought up. And one of the threads that we've seen during COVID has been around amplifying and elevating the critical experience of all children, particularly children of color, children from disenfranchised or minoritized populations, et cetera. And I did see that thread running through here. Like, what would you say to teachers that are trying to like lean into this research? What advice would you give them? What direction would you give them to link this idea of really being equitable for each child and enacting the science of reading work? Because it is a big topic.
I don't mind jumping in on this one. There is so much to know about teaching. I think, you know, our colleagues who are experts in teacher education at Vanderbilt have helped me understand much better how much information people need in order to be good teachers. And good literacy teachers need to know an awful lot about a very, very broad range of topics to be effective in terms of the work that they're doing with their kids. So our advice is learn as much as you can. One of our colleagues, Emily Phillips Galloway, who I think is just an amazing human being and has an article in this collection, by the way, has often sort of pushed me on that. People need to learn more, to be able to contribute to this conversation. You need to know probably a lot more than you know right now. And that goes for researchers, that goes for professors, that goes for graduate students, and definitely is true for teachers. I think that would be my advice. Learn as much as you can. The other part is, and I think this comes through in articles by Sylvia Nogueron Liu and Rich Milner, Allison Scarrett has a piece. Believe in these kids. They are smart, they are motivated, they want to work hard, and they'll do that when they're convinced that you know what you're doing as a teacher. I think a lot of the issues that people complain about in terms of classroom instruction are due to the fact that there's just so much more to learn in order to provide kids with the kinds of experiences that they actually deserve. For the kids that I care most about, the English language learners, the kids who are emergent bilinguals, those kids are unbelievably amazing in terms of everything that they bring with them into the classroom. And the teachers that we work with find this out when they start implementing instruction that taps into the areas of strength that they bring with them into schools. I think we have some of that information in this collection of articles. I know Silvia Nogueron Liu talks a little bit about translanguaging and the kinds of activities that immigrant families engage in with their kids. And I think those are good starting places for teachers. But my sense is, yeah, try these things out, learn as much as you can. And I think you'll probably be very pleasantly surprised in terms of the ways that kids respond to that sort of instruction.
And I'll build off of Bob's statement there, because I think Bob was saying learn as much as you can about the science of reading. And yes, read these articles. Just like I said, you will learn something from every single one of them. And I think there's actionable suggestions in them. And so that's exciting. But the other part about learn as much as you can is learn as much as you can about your students and their families. The thing that came out, and yourself, the thing that came out of this work for me was that students, we talk about the science of reading over and over again, but students and their families are at the center of this work. And so, I need to understand my positionality, who I am. I need to understand to be a critical consumer. But that means my first step is to go get to know my kids, get to know what is their language background. I mean, there's more diversity within groups as well that I need to attend to and understand as a teacher. And so I think know as much about the research as you can, but then go to your students and their families to know as much about them.
Mm-hmm. And so just to pivot a little bit, you did mention, we're all talking about it, that most schools many schools, a preponderance of schools in the United States are now moving to online learning. In any of this work, I noticed that there are a couple articles that do attend to digital learning. Like what advice or direction might you give readers to continue their learning around how to pivot this work into an online learning situation? Tell us your thoughts around this, because it's a big deal too.
Well, I think there's accuracy in both the things that Bob and I just said. Like, first of all, you still need to know your students. You need to know who's logging on, who's not logging on, when are they logging on, why is their screen blank? How do you position them in a way that, acknowledges and honors who they and their family are and the many, many, many things that they and their family are doing to make this COVID learning successful. I mean, families are juggling and literally doing amazing things to get their students, their kids, at the computer learning. So I think the first thing is get to know your families. There's little things you can do: a phone call home, a text home. I was talking to my teacher candidates are, in a practicum and they're on Zoom, and they were saying, a few kids don't log on, or they log on and they close their screen off right away. I was like, well, maybe you should make a phone call to them and say, hey, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'm so interested in what you have to say. So there's a lot of those good things that come with good teaching. And then the next part is that a lot of what we're talking about translates directly. So for example, that whole point about orthography means that, you and I are talking here without any orthography behind us except for my name across the screen, right? So if I'm teaching kids how to read words, I need to be able to use the wonderful virtual tools that are out there that many companies have developed, that many companies have given for free. I need to provide the texts so that kids can see them. So these principles that are in these articles, for example, I need to include writing. So these principles that are in these articles, they apply to the virtual setting. And that is where we as teachers, researchers, practitioners all need to come together. And when someone reads something that they want to figure out how to do virtually, we need to all problem solve this problem of practice and figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, I would just throw in there that you need to critically examine the curriculum that you've been given. I mean, one of the great things about this collection of pieces is, as Amanda noted, you know, what is the role of orthography and spelling and automatic word recognition? How does that play out in the curriculum that you're using with your students? Is it providing the kinds of instruction that I'm probably sure most teachers know their students need? I mean, most teachers that I speak with have very high expectations for the kids. They want to succeed. They want to do a good job. But I think a lot of times curriculum is sort of viewed as a static given, when in fact some curricular materials are better than others. And some provide the kinds of experiences and information, activities that the kids need, and with respect to where they happen to be right at this moment. So for English language learners, gosh, and as Amanda noted, probably all students, there's so much about language that they need to know in order to really critically sort of interact with the curricular materials, the textual materials that they find themselves, that they find in front of them once they're in the classroom. And that's where teaching comes in. As teachers, we show the kids, what is it that you need to know? What are the things that are going to recur, that are going to come up over and over and over again? You know, what is academic language? What does it consist of? How do you know it when you see it? Some of that information is in this collection of articles. And I think, yeah, it can make all the difference in the world when a teacher is focused on, you know, using what they know about their students in interaction with the curriculum materials that they have, and the professional learning experiences that they have available to them. I think those kinds of, that combination probably is going to result in students who are excited about learning and who are making the kinds of progress we all want to see.
I'd hope so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thinking, before I ask you some big policy questions and we get to the Q&A, by the way, we have a robust Q&A, keep them coming, we're getting there. Can you both mentioned, I'm going to go back to this idea of learning. Like when we talk about the definition of science of reading, then and now, like what would you direct, or not direct, but encourage educators to say, like, I used to think this, but now I think this after reading these articles? Like what would be your hopes and dreams for the readers here as they go out into the world to try to mitigate this really narrow mindset?
You know, I think that's exactly what we tried to tackle in our summary. You know, when I was writing up the summary, Lisa, I literally went to all the articles and I started copying and pasting everybody's definition of the science of reading. And when I didn't have them, I asked the authors, what's your definition of the science of reading? You know, and I think what was interesting was I learned about it too. So I had been thinking about this divisively when I came into it. I was thinking about it sort of as this redoing of the reading wars, phonics versus whole language. We're coming back at it again. But, you know, Patricia Alexander called me out on that, and I really appreciated it. And she emphasized that it's not either or, that it's not this, divisive way that we need to think about it. So I would say my old way of thinking about it was this divisive way of thinking about it, where the science of reading that I knew was broad, but the way that it was being talked about was narrow. And what I've learned from this experience is that the science of reading is much broader than I even conceptualized it to be. And there's important work being done in all these different buckets that is critical for me as a researcher, but also teachers, principals, policymakers, parents to be thinking about, because again, it changes how you advocate for your child. It changes what you honor with these children. And so for me, you know, divisive, narrow, but now broad and critical is my new way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that idea, except to keep an open mind. Keep in mind, this is nothing is static. What we know about kids learning and their, you know, their literate development is constantly evolving and changing. Um, th- I think one of the nice things about this collection is you get a good sense of what it is that we know right now. And it's definitely a very, very good base for thinking about how to move forward. But new information is coming out all the time. So stay in the conversation. If you are a teacher, you are seeing things that those of us in the academy need to hear about. And we can't know about it unless someone like you in the classroom is talking to us. So you're a very critical part of the system in terms of how to make sure that the instruction we're providing to kids is actually doing the job that we want it to do. So that would be my point, is keep an open mind, understand that you probably will learn something every day. I mean, one of my favorite sayings comes from Paulo Freire: none of us knows everything, all of us know something. And we can all help one another learn and move forward in terms of our understanding of these issues and questions.
Mhm.
I think I'll add to that too, like just the fact that like reading is complicated. And so whenever we're looking for a magic bullet or, you know, an easy solution, it's not going to work, right? We need to think broader, and we need to acknowledge and honor the multifaceted nature of reading. When we do that, then, you know, the recipe comes together and we become chefs and we put all these pieces together in meaningful ways that are joyful. You know, at the end of the day, you know, things that I also wish was in this collection was the joy of reading, was differentiation. There's things that are missing. And that's because some of these things are really hard to measure. And so it's important to think about what's in the science of reading and what's not, and how we can still honor, you know, childhood and learning to read in childhood.
Maybe editors that come after us, Amanda, can do a special issue on the joyfulness.
Yeah. Yes. You don't want to do one next, Bob? You don't want that to be our
No.
I think a lot of people would be excited about the joyfulness. And Bob, I would just like to say thank you, as somebody who works with a lot of practicing educators. It's so important that teachers know they're not alone, and that everybody out there who's working with kiddos every day, yes, if you're learning something, to share it out is so critical, right? So that everyone can do their work and continue the research. It's huge. Thinking about the system, I'm going to pivot to the system a little bit. In some of the articles they talk, and Amanda, I believe you referenced this earlier, around the larger structures that we can push on, either as educators or community members or administrators. Can you speak a little bit about what you learned around the system and policy recommendations that you found when you collected and curated this body of work?
You know, I'll speak about power and lobbies and who's has the power and just how powerful that is. You know, I think that I got into this because there was just a lot of teacher education requirements coming down the line. And for the most part, there was just a big emphasis on making sure there was phonics instruction. And don't get me wrong, we've always had phonics instruction. It's important. You need phonics instruction. But I was wondering why there wasn't mandatory other pieces, including criticality. Why there wasn't, you know, mandatory classes on culturally sustaining pedagogies, anti-racist practices. You know, these things, reading is multifaceted. So I think the structures that are in place is this criticality. I really appreciate the district personnel with whom we work often. And they often come to us and they'll say, like, what do you think about this? It would have been really easy for them, instead of asking us, to have just gone their merry way and like Googled it or read an article. And there's, you know, I am so appreciative of the media because I think that they are doing the translation work. But the challenge there is that sometimes it's not always translated in an accurate way that involves the researcher's voice. And so I really appreciate when policymakers go to the actual authors or go to folks like Bob and I, who are editors who have to read large cadres of research and to say, like, what was actually found there. You know, I really appreciated our district personnel who said, what actually is the science of reading? Because they had read that the science of reading was phonics instruction, and they were going to plan some really great phonics instruction. And that was going to be great, except for the fact that it was, when we had a conversation about it, we emphasized that that was one part of instruction. And so it was really exciting to have that conversation, have that discourse. And so those are the structures that need to be in place. The structures to have the information out there like this, but then also like lots of information for district leaders, principals, policymakers, et cetera, so they can think about how to apply this within their own contexts. Because again, context really matters. You know, you talked about structures that matter. Teacher training matters, and how often you change things on teachers matters. If you just get a new curriculum every year, it's not going to work, no matter how good the curriculum is. So there were things about teacher professional development that were really important takeaways. There were also, you know, infrastructures that needed to be in place. And so I think that that stuff is also important. I mean, one of the pieces called for the fact that, like, we can't just have a few standards to check off for teachers. We need to teach teachers how to have the adaptive expertise to change their instruction for the 25 different kids that are in their room. So given phonics and how important it is important to teach the hard C, but only to kids who don't know the hard C. So how do you then adapt your lesson? You know, I had a wonderful teacher ed student yesterday who was like, but then how do I teach phonics to my whole classroom of kids? And it is tricky. And I love the papers that call out the trickiness of that and suggest different interventions that have worked with practicing teachers that we could then train teachers with.
I'm pausing for a second because I think we just segued automatically into the Q&A.
Oh, hey.
If that's all right, because one of the big questions was about teacher preparation around how we might engage in this. And Amanda, I think you just leaned in. Bob, do you have anything to add around that, around what might our university colleagues do to kind of push this wheel forward?
You know, I think, and I'll just pull a little bit from research here, there are some practices that teachers need to understand really, really well. For example, you know, something really as simple as small group discussion. For a lot of folks, for a lot of people in classrooms, that's a very frightening kind of activity, much more comfortable with whole class instruction, for example. And so there are a number of instructional practices. How do you help kids, for example, integrate what they know already, or connect what they know already to information they're reading in textual materials? I think teachers need lots of practice doing that, implementing it, trying it out, getting feedback, seeing how it works, and then thinking it through as to what worked well there, what didn't work. I think one of the great scandals of our time is how very little money and resources we devote to teacher preparation and learning. And it's incredibly expensive as is, but but becoming a great teacher is every bit as difficult as becoming a good lawyer, becoming maybe, you know, a practicing doctor. And we just don't devote the kinds of resources to teacher education that I think we probably should be. And so we put teachers in classrooms, they close the door, and they're oftentimes just left alone first couple of years when they should be having intensive interaction with colleagues, with other folks, about the kinds of practices, the kinds of instruction that they're going to have to do to really help kids make progress in terms of their academic achievement. I don't know if you want to add to that, Amanda, but
Well, I think also,
like there's so much more we could do on that score.
Well, I think there's a few different things to think about. I mean, first of all, there's a big emphasis in the articles on actually getting in there and practicing.
Yeah.
And practicing the complexities. So there is an emphasis on going in and having a lesson about teaching the hard C, but with your, mentor teacher or with your support, it could be your professor, it can be your colleague, it can be whoever it happens to be, thinking about what does it look like to differentiate the lesson with the hard C, and to try it, and then to get feedback on what you did and what worked, what didn't work. Then it's important to try it with small groups. Then it's important to try it individually. And then so I think the big thing that came across to me in the teacher literature was the importance of trying things with feedback, because it's just a complicated model, and teachers are going to be juggling those things, and they have to start getting used to juggling those things. The second thing that came apart was, as Bob said earlier, learning. It's complex. And so we need to teach teacher candidates and, help support teachers in learning across time. One of the best things about working with colleagues like Bob is they've been in the field for 30 years. There's just a knowledge that comes with learning something every day for 30 years. And so we prepare teachers to start with a really strong foundation, but it's important to keep learning moving forward. And then the other thing that I think came across in the teacher ed literature in this article was the criticality piece, and the importance of agency, and the importance of considering different backgrounds and race and ethnicity. And so I think that's something that hasn't always been an emphasis of teacher ed. I see lots of, courses work on phonics and that kind of stuff, but we really are going to need to add to our coursework or our experiences so that teacher candidates can consider the different contexts that they're going to be working in. If they're just going in and they're thinking about the 25 different phonics levels with the hard C, it's a really different thing than if they're thinking about the different backgrounds of their kids and how to engage their kids. We'd mentioned joy earlier. How do you even start that in a way that's exciting for kids versus just the drudge? There's so many exciting pieces. I think there's an art to it. And so giving teacher candidates and teachers the opportunity to be artists and try things out, and then also to celebrate them when they are artists. Mm-hmm. We don't celebrate teachers enough. We don't publish teachers enough. And that's where some of these articles are so exciting. One in particular profiles 3 amazing teachers who aren't amazing only because they're teaching the exact phonics science, but are amazing because they're integrating writing, phonics, they're integrating students' backgrounds, they're doing it from a critical perspective. And then they're also pushing back on that. One of my comments to the author was, this could have happened in any classroom. And the author wrote back and said, well, my multilingual kids liked pets. They wanted to write about pets. And so it's understanding these kids for who they are, I think is really important for teacher ed.
In this section, as I mentioned, I'm looking up here at some of the questions that have been raised, and that was one of them. Thank you for sharing that. A recurring theme in the questions is around, what do you recommend for teachers, especially the school year? Like, what do you recommend they sunset? What do you recommend they highlight? Like, there's so many responsibilities placed on teachers right now, and they're, again, having to pivot into online learning. What findings or teacher moves should they do that can give insight to practices that teachers should stop or start doing?
Sure. I think there's the key finding there were 2 key findings. The first was that the science of reading, as has been described, matters. So yes, foundational skills matter. Please, please, please make sure you are teaching kids the code of language. It's critical, and that matters. But then our other findings, and you can see this in the summary as well, is that there's other buckets that are meaningful. I mentioned writing before, mentioned language knowledge. We mentioned background knowledge, including whose background knowledge matters and what background knowledge are we building. Content knowledge. Can we build language knowledge and content knowledge at the same time? So there's these buckets that as a teacher, I would literally just have sticky notes on my cabinet and be like, okay, so, how do I integrate all this in one lesson? What kind of background knowledge am I facilitating here? How am I facilitating it? At the same time, can I facilitate knowledge of language, academic language versus formal language, like whatever it happens to be? But the idea is that teachers are doing so many things that if you can look at those buckets and think about how they overlap versus thinking about them as separate, I think that that's when you can really pivot to super strong instruction, especially given the current context.
Yeah, I know right now things are really, really demanding in terms of what teachers are being asked to do. In a sense, that my impression has been, at least with respect to our own research project that's going on at the moment, is that teachers are just having to figure out exactly how to make sure that they get in touch with all of their students. It might have been you, Amanda, who told me that 25% of the kids aren't logging on for instruction at this current time. And so, yeah, anything you can do to make sure that your kids are connected to school and staying connected with you as an instructor, I think is probably priority number one. And from what I can tell, teachers are being given curricular materials that they're being told that they must use. But even so, I think that, there's some room for thinking about those materials. Do they actually meet the needs of the kids? And if they don't, is there anything you can do to sort of supplement and make sure that they're getting all the different information that they need? So though, that one piece scares me a great deal. Are kids actually able to connect with their teachers and stay abreast of instruction at grade level? My guess is that's just an incredible challenge right now for teachers and their students.
And honestly, like, this is happening in the time of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So I think at the same time, reaching out and really honoring the families and honoring what we can do in this current time. And so, Liisa, I really appreciate that you said, what can we do? Not all of it. Look, we are here to support teachers and families. And that was the whole point of this issue, was to empower folks that had really been, talked against. So a lot of times teachers were blamed for things. Teachers aren't doing the right things. Teachers aren't doing this. And I don't want anybody to walk away with that message here. I am not saying teachers aren't doing the right things. I'm saying this is complicated. And I'm saying that here's some things that we can all keep learning and that we can all integrate as we try to do this thing better. I'm saying we know more about this thing than we were talking about. And so I'm excited to talk about this broader space because I think it honors the broader, wonderful things that teachers were and are doing in the classroom. I get to sit in and watch some virtual instruction, and teachers are heroic. Principals are heroic for the policies they're having to come up with around this time, for having to figure out how to pivot to online assessments or in person, or this week it's in person, next week it's online. It is a very challenging scenario. And so I hope that teachers, principals, policymakers, and researchers come away from this feeling more supported, feeling less blamed, and feeling honored for the many different things that they're doing, and hopefully getting a few ideas about some additional things to do, or possibly how to prioritize so that it's not quite so overwhelming right now.
And maybe that's one of the greatest takeaways from the special collection, Amanda, is this collection of work will provide you with understanding of what the questions are, what the issues are, what it is that we actually do know, so that people can't sort of throw at you the kinds of questions that might make you feel insecure about what it is that what you're doing right now with your students.
Thank you for sharing those pieces. And I know that some of our questions are kind of overlapping. So I'm going to pivot up to, we got a lot of questions about the process that you as editors have had to go through specifically. So like one question just says, how do you hold yourselves accountable as editors? Aside from your mentors, how do you continue to purposefully allow yourself to learn to do the best job that you can when you select these proposals and abstracts?
I think it's just allowing yourself to be vulnerable, surrounding yourself by amazing people. And so, I really honor the ILA staff. They've been really wonderful at asking hard questions, at challenging us. I also, we purposefully picked associate editors that were strong folks in the field. And the way that I held myself accountable for that was I tried to pick folks from different perspectives. And I asked people, which perspectives and that kind of stuff, because I think it would have been really easy to have put out an issue that was one-sided. And it was challenging to bridge these perspectives, but I think it was the most important work that we did. And so the associate editors, surrounding yourself by strong people, the associate editors were amazing, and they challenged us all the time, just saying like, well, I don't really think that that's what should be being said here. Let's, challenge the author this way, or, how do you see this? So I think it's surrounding yourself with strong people. I also think Bob and I coming from different perspectives is a really important part of our editorship. We challenge each other, and we're not afraid to question each other. And I think that that's really important. And so, I think being cognizant of your vulnerabilities, being real about it, but then also surrounding yourself with really strong, critical people and accepting the critique when it comes at you and using that to move forward has been really important to us.
And what Amanda just said, I think, is absolutely critical and essential in terms of understanding how the process that we go through before we approve of anything in terms of publication. We have an amazing and incredible editorial board, and they know so much about so many different topics that are sometimes on the very periphery of anything that I've ever learned about. And so for us, it's a learning process, but we tend to rely a great deal on our outside reviewers' judgment. And they do push us in directions that I think ultimately have the effect of making sure that only the very best work ends up in print in Reading Research Quarterly. So that's all I think I will say about that topic.
And I'll just add too that we're not perfect, and
Yeah.
we're always learning. And with this summer's emphasis on a call to action for really highlighting systemic inequities, we took a look at who our associate editors were for the first special issue, and we purposefully reached out. We did a large search. We searched our authorship, we searched our reviewers, we searched who's been involved in RQ, who are scholars of color, and we purposely reached out because we agreed that we had not been as cognizant as we had wanted to. I mean, we were when we set this up, we had purposely set up our editorial board to be representative, but I think we hadn't carried that through as much as we wanted. So I think part of this is just being critical of ourselves and growing and being purposeful.
And there's always room to improve, right?
We're always trying to improve, but again, the things that we're trying to do at RQ is we are trying to get the message out. So we hope you guys are following us on social media. RQ is a Facebook page that we are posting articles or overviews on. We have also interviewed a lot of the RQ authors, and we plan to interview the Science of Reading authors moving forward. I have my first interview tomorrow with Steve Graham. Thank you, Steve, for being willing to be our first. Steve was actually my first interview 2 or 3 years ago when I tried this series. But we're really trying to get these academic articles out to bridge to practice. And so we hope you'll follow us on social media. We hope you'll engage with us. We hope you'll, let us know what's working and what's not working so that we as a community can keep moving forward.
Great. Thank you. And sorry I went off for a second. I had to grab a small dog. This is just here. I'm sorry, ILA staff. I'm just going to point out I have a small dog now who's participating with us.
Better than small children. Just who knows, my 2 and 4-year-old might be down here any minute.
I'm just extending grace and empathy to all of our teachers who are trying to teach online, that even in controlled situations, these things happen. There are just a couple more questions that I want to just ask you guys about before kind of getting your sage and expert next steps for us. One of them, or actually a lot of them, are just about the definitions of science of reading. And there's a media version, Emily Hanford's put out a bunch of stuff. There's some commentary and the questions about that. And when you put out this work in Reading Research Quarterly around the science of reading, I'm understanding, listening to you, that you're opening that definition up. Have you come to a place where you feel like you could hand that definition to someone? Like, if my teacher colleagues say, well, what's the new definition of science of reading? Like, what should we be saying to each other about this work, about the definitions?
I put a bunch of those in the summary, but like, just from an informal perspective, I think it's the scientific research that's peer reviewed that provides deeper understandings of how we read to learn across different orthographies, across different contexts, and how we teach those things. And so I've seen a few questions in the chat about, like, is anything science of reading, or is there a line? And I do think there's a line. Like, there is evidence is needed for there to be science of reading. Clear research design is needed. And there is a lot of articles that come through our RQ that don't have a clear link between research design and their research questions. So, for example, they don't actually use a research design that can answer their questions, or they use a measure that doesn't actually measure that construct. So it matters how we measure these things. That is the science. It matters how we explore these things. For qualitative research, it matters how the trends are analyzed. It matters the evidence that is provided of these things. As an editor, I watch reviewers problematize qualitative research often for the fact that the evidence that's provided does not back up their findings. It is important that evidence is part of our science, but I think the point about the broad piece is that there's no one science that matters, right? It's not just experimental research. It's not just quantitative research. It's not just qualitative research. We are using all and every methodology to figure out this multifaceted thing called reading. And I think our methodologies are going to keep innovating. I think they're going to keep being improved. A lot of the original science of reading work was done prior to multi-level modeling, for example, and didn't take into account the nestings of classrooms. That's important to do now that we have the methods to do that, when that aligns with your research questions. And so the key piece here is that the science is using the state-of-art research methods to match the research questions. And so that's where you have to rely on the peer review process, because each and every article that comes out of journals like Reading Research Quarterly has to go through a peer review process. And it's reviewed by 2 to 4 external individuals with strong expertise who have no idea who the authors are. And so they are just looking at it for the science. They are looking at it for whether it should be added to the science of reading.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that answers your question, Lisa, but I think it's anything that adds to our understanding of reading and teaching that has scientific evidence.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add maybe one parenthetical comment about how that peer review process is critical, and work that comes through RRQ gets looked at very, very, very carefully, and the rigor of the thinking is evaluated with a very high level of criteria in terms of, does this actually add to our understanding? Does this move the field forward? Is this innovative in any way? Does it have any sort of actionable kind of outcomes that we could predict will actually affect the ways that instruction is delivered or implemented in classrooms? And I think a lot of the work that we see sometimes goes through 3 to 4 revisions before we approve. And that's if it's been getting good sort of reviews all along the way. And that can be really, really rough on authors and researchers. There's probably lots of folks out there who won't even talk to me anymore.
Editors, on us too, Bob.
If we don't get support from our reviewers, unless there's something in there that the reviewers completely missed, we typically drop the work and move forward with something that's getting more positive kinds of feedback. So the peer review process, it sounds kind of abstract and academic and theoretical, but it's a tough row to hoe, as those of us who have published a lot of our work know. And getting into RRQ, for me as a graduate student, that was sort of my dream. If I could get my work there, I knew I was doing well in the field. I know Amanda feels very, very similar. And that's because my mentors, that's where they published their work. And so just looking at what they were doing and the kinds of effect that they were having on the field was the motivation for me to really look at RRQ as the place to place my academic writing. So
and I'll say, I think that's why RRQ could do this.
Yeah.
You know, we tackled this because we felt like this was being discussed everywhere. And it should. It was literally being discussed at my parent pre-K meetings. But we felt like that it needed to be discussed by the researchers who were doing the science-y research. And again, we just want to thank everybody involved, authors, reviewers, associate editors, ILA staff, and Suzanne Vizcarra, who is our editorial associate, who I don't know if she's slept in 6 months. But RRQ is a special place. It is a place that honors different perspectives. And when Bob and I joined as editors, we committed ourselves to learning about things that we didn't know about, to thinking about things that we didn't necessarily think were important unless they got, but other people were thinking about them as important. So we needed to really understand why that could be important. We committed ourselves to learning about different methodologies and honoring different methodologies. And we really committed ourselves to honoring teachers in practice, because one of our commitments was to figure out how to get this research out to teachers and policymakers and parents and principals and practitioners who could actually act on it. It matters to us whether this science impacts classrooms. It matters to us whether this science supports families and teachers and students and kids.
That's one. I was going to ask you for any closing remarks, and it sounds like you're pretty close to that. Again, there are a bunch of questions, and they're kind of themed from what can I do tomorrow to what can I do to push the larger picture. And I think you've both expressed a lot about pushing the larger picture. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wind down?
Well, I think if people are wanting to know what can I do tomorrow, like I would join RRQ Facebook page right now. Go on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. I'm at Dr. Goodwin for Lit. And the reason I say that is because we try to put actionable things from each article each day. And so our amazing doctoral student, Michael, has been tackling posting about each article of the science of reading. I think we started last week, towards the end of last week. And so each day you're going to get a little tidbit that you can then try to think about what to do. I think today was Patricia Alexander's piece about digital reading. And it's a short overview. It's a link to the article too, but it's a short overview that just says like, this is what they found. And then I, as a teacher, can be like, okay, well, how do I actually act upon this? I can think about it. So I think that stuff helps. What's going to also happen in those pieces is that's where we're going to put all the interviews with the authors. And in those interviews with authors, we ask them to define science of reading. We ask them, what does their article mean to teachers? What does their article mean to principals and policymakers? What does their article mean to parents? And so that's actionable advice. And I'm the crazy person. I no longer commute because it's COVID, but before I commuted, I listened to these podcasts, which were our interviews on the way in. And then it was perfect. It just kind of added to my thinking. It didn't take anything away. And so thinking of ways to educate yourself on the run to get those tidbits, I think is really powerful. And we're trying to figure out how to give you those tidbits because we know that it matters how we translate this science. And so keep telling us what works, what doesn't work, because, really what we're going to be doing is the things that people are using. We put a lot of resources into this.
Fabulous. Thank you.
And I'd say also, Lisa, just to add on the long-term view, just start reading and trying. Also, if you're near a local university, partner with us, study what you're trying and what's working, what's not working. Teacher action research is incredibly powerful to see what's working for your students and what's not. And I know I speak for Bob in that we are strong advocates of partnerships with local school districts. We love our local school district. We value it because it's where the kids in our community are going to learn. We know there are incredible challenges that schools and school districts are facing, that families are facing right now, but also period. And so, we hope that researchers will be part of these solutions. And we certainly hope that this issue is part of the solution.
Yeah, I would just throw in there that the field is incredibly fortunate to have Amanda Goodwin, editor of Reading Research Court. I mean, no one has more great ideas for how to promote research and its impact on schools and classrooms than Amanda. And she's got one great idea after another. And this special issue is just one manifestation of some of the really, really fascinating, incredible work that I've been very privileged to be a part of. But yeah, this has been quite an experience.
You're making me blush, Bob. I do have all sorts of ideas, but really also I'm a good listener. So all of you out there, share your ideas. Let us know if they're working, because this is a lot of work. We are doing a lot of work for you, and it only is the right work if it's helping you. Yeah. So the hope is that this special issue adds accuracy, bridges divides, and moves the field forward. I hope this special issue gets us talking. I was talking with a colleague, and they were saying how fascinating it would be to have people of different perspectives in the same interview and let them talk back to each other. I love that idea. Keep sharing your ideas with us. We're going to run with as many as we can. We're only human, so we only have just so much we can do, but we're working hard for you because we really at the core believe and know that the science of reading matters. But what matters is what we're talking about for the science of reading. And so we really hope that what this issue found is what starts being talked about. We honor all the parties involved. We know we're all in it for the right reason. We all want kids to do great. And so hopefully we can work together. Hopefully we can have the conversations we need to have. Just like Bob said, we're learning, and we hope we'll all be learning together.
Well, thank you for those closing comments. Tremendous thank you to Amanda, Bob, for this conversation. And for those of you who joined us and submitted questions, thank you, everyone. Keep reading, keep asking questions, and have a good evening. And I'm going to turn it over to, I believe you're going to put up the ILA slides so you can learn more.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Tonight's event is just one component of a larger initiative examining the science of reading. We invite you to explore the full collection of resources at literacyworldwide.org/SOR. RRQ subscribers have early access to articles appearing in this special issue. Follow the link on literacyworldwide.org/SOR to see the collection. If you're not a current RRQ subscriber but would like to become one, visit, you guessed it, literacyworldwide.org/SOR for more information. We hope to see you again this Thursday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern for Making Sense of the Science of Reading. This online ILA intensive explores the spectrum of reading on research instruction and looks at how to put effective, evidence-based strategies into practice. The power-packed group of speakers represents a diverse range of perspectives on SOR. Registration includes 1 full year of on-demand access, so those unable to attend live may view at their own convenience. We also hope you'll join us for ILA Next. ILA Next looks at the impact of distance and hybrid learning, equity and access, social emotional development, and trauma responsiveness through the lens of high-quality literacy instruction. This month-long event kicks off October 3rd. ILA members enjoy a special registration rate of just $99. Visit ilanext.org to learn more and to register. Visit the ILA Digital Events webpage at literacyworldwide.org/digital events for on-demand content, as well as information on upcoming webinars and other learning opportunities. Finally, a reminder that if you're not already following ILA on social media, please make sure to do so for the most up-to-date information. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and yes, even on Instagram. Once again, thank you for joining us this evening.